All right, welcome everyone. This is the Game 1 recap of the 2018 World Championship match between Magnus Carlsen and Fabiano Caruana. Caruana had white today. Carlsen decided to take white in game 2 in the drawing of colors. So, with that said, let's get into the game.
Started with e4. I think everyone could have predicted Fabiano Caruana playing e4. Fabiano Caruana playing e4, followed by Magnus playing e5. Probably most people's prediction. But c5 was actually the move by Magnus. I don't think anyone really expected this. Probably the person who's most surprised was Fabi. And when he saw it, I think it was noticeable in the opening. He already started spending more time right at the beginning of the game, which gave Magnus a time advantage. And you could also sense that he was probably not as comfortable as positions he's seen before, but he didn't expect certainly that round 1 of the World Championship he would face Magnus playing
and not
knight
even
c6.
the Najdorf. If you're
Not
going to
even
see
the
the
Najdorf.
Sicilian, you're used to the Najdorf at the top level, but instead he goes for knight c6, which is a whole different opening setup.
Right, completely different. He decides to play bishop b5, going for the Rossolimo, which is again the type of position that Fabiano is very familiar with. So it wasn't that he was out of book; he was just surprised to be playing Magnus in this line.
Bishop c6, dc6.
Yeah, bc6 is the other main option instead of d takes c6. But again, I think dc6 is the one that Magnus had prepared to play because he certainly expected this. d3, bishop g7, and I think basically some very, very standard moves until you see knight d7, which again is a standard move, but not something that makes a lot of sense if you haven't seen the opening before.
Yep, White's claiming that he has a bit of a better pawn structure due to those double C pawns, and Black saying, well, I have some compensation in the form of 2 bishops, which may not be, maximized yet, but in the future, as things open up, they will be valuable. So that's why bishop e3 allows the next follow-up. E5.
Castles b6. He plays b6 because he wants to execute the following plan. As both players sort of do some maneuvering, the position isn't going to open up immediately, which is why Black doesn't feel the need to castle right away, and Fabi also going for a maneuver of his own. Knight h2 followed by knight f8. And this knight, as soon as it was played to f6, I can tell you the intention was probably always to be playing knight d7 and knight f8. He wants to bring the knight to e6. Once the knight's on e6, it controls d4, controls f4, makes this break harder. Maybe you can play knight d4 as well. But knight e6 is just a nice central square controlling everything.
Right. I mean, the alternative to this knight f8 was castling, but then Caruana would have executed probably the standard plan with trading off the dark square bishops.
Yeah.
We show that.
If he had done...
Well, just why Black delays castling is tries to get the knight on e6 first. Here bishop h6 is going to be played, and it's favorable for White to trade off the bishop pair, trade off the fianchetto. That usually weakens someone's king side a little bit. And when f4, which is also something that Caruana clearly wanted with knight h2, happens.
Right.
That won't. If you remove that dark square bishop on g7, you're not opening up this diagonal as much from h8 to a1.
Yeah.
So you didn't want to trade off the bishop pair. All this was pretty mainstream theory, and I think CARLSEN and his team completely expected it.
Yeah, I think he was probably still had this position at home analyzed. This was probably a surprising move. It's always very visual when you see a move like rook takes f4, don't usually see the rooks developing that far up the board so early in the game, but if he got attacked with knight e6, he would return with rook to f2, and he wants to double on the f-file. So actually when we were commentating the game, I think around here it started to feel kind of natural for white. Like things were making sense in terms of the flow of the game. Queen d2, rook f2, rook f1, just all these moves all made sense as follow-ups.
Yeah, I mean, black is taking a little bit of time to develop, so white naturally wants to open up on some wing, because otherwise you're not really punishing your opponent for taking so much time to complete development. So this was all fairly standard, and now, I mean, it's not the moves are pretty normal, but the order in which they're done is a little funky, especially now after rook f2, CARLSEN played h6, and that sort of indicated to us that things that he had, they had some ideas, and that they weren't just going to rely on previous setups and things like that. Because after h6, you're saying, I'm probably not castling.
Yeah.
Queen d2, and I'll never build a castle because h6 will be weak.
Yeah. There's no way you can do this because the pawn will just hang.
And so this was when started getting the impression that Magnus was a little more ambitious in the opening, and that it was probably going to be a fight, especially after g5, where you weaken the f5 square. On the other hand, you cover h4 and f4, which limits the scope of this bishop on e3, and also gives way potentially to that knight on f8 jumping to g6, just as an additional option.
Yeah.
So
you see, basically both players got some advantages and some disadvantages here. You got the light squares that white's going to be trying to play for, like knight g3, knight f5, or knight h5. And yeah, as Eric said, meanwhile, all the dark squares are weak in return. So I think this is where we actually felt, more so after long castle by Magnus, that he was developing kind of a serious advantage around this point. It became clear that this queen d6 move was very strong. Hits the g3 square. There's no way that a rook can go to like f3 in order to help a knight get there, because it'll always get pushed around by knight e5 or knight h4. And otherwise, this knight can just never access the g3 square, which means no pieces are getting in here. And it's probably actually the dark squares in the position that are more vulnerable, and that seemed to us gave Magnus the edge early on. I think Fabi agreed.
Yeah, well, one indication we could tell early on was Magnus built a nice 20-minute cushion on the clocks, which is can be quite significant. Definitely later on it played a role, especially here. Two bishops, the position is opening up. We're castled on opposite sides. You gotta be happy if you're black here. That's what your bishops want. They want to breathe. They want open files. You want to open up the king side. Probably open the G and the H files in front of white's king, and so now it was time for Magnus, after completing development, to try to dislodge this knight and get those lines going. Yep.
Yeah, it was here. I mean, knight takes d7 was possible. We thought the position would be quite unpleasant after bishop arrives on e5, and long term just play f6 and h5.
Yeah, can we see that for a sec? I wanna.
That was pretty uncomfortable. We thought maybe something like this, and just the idea of f6 happening.
Yeah.
And h5 is just so difficult to deal with, and that was essentially what the game was all about, trying to get this h5 move. Except Fabi decided to plant his knight there to stop it. Whereas if he goes for this line, I don't think there's anything he can do about it. So yeah, knight d7 was possible, but he went with knight h5. After bishop e5, it doesn't look good, but the concrete follow-up was g4. And we didn't, can't say we loved the move, but I understand why it was played, and it does make some sense. And I think from here it's fair to say that it was very hard for at least myself to predict Magnus's moves, because he was playing a lot off intuition. He was playing off his intuition, is what it seemed like. He was definitely calculating very well this game, but he was playing off his intuition, and he had an idea here. He plays f6, and all he wants to do is play bishop f7, get rid of this knight, and either win the pawn on h5 because it's difficult to defend, or crash through on the king side with g4. Meanwhile, maybe rerouting this knight to the f4, d4 squares. So it seemed like Magnus basically took an approach here that he's going to play quickly, confidently, trust his intuition, and go for the attack. And it seemed like the rest of his moves were pretty consistent to that goal.
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty ideal if you look at this position that Black has a free attack. He's trying to open up on the king side. White's got nothing on the queen side. White's bishop on e3 doesn't have any squares. The knight on c3 doesn't do anything. So Magnus at this point was up 30 minutes, and yeah, it's all about opening the position up when you have the bishops. And for Fabio's damage control is pretty clear. He wasn't comfortable based on the moves and the time he was spending.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think the following sequence of moves is just Fabi, first of all, being low on time. It was a big factor in the game. And Magnus offering this pawn with knight f8, which definitely probably surprised a lot of people, including us. But he sacrificed it with the intuition that the resulting position after bishop takes f4, gf4 was good for Black. And I was just extremely impressed by this whole sequence, that I believe he was right as well, which was even more impressive, and that the dark squares were just too much, because even though Fabiano seemed to do quite well in defense here, he trades some pieces, finds some squares for the knight. The calm technique by Magnus, he just plays queen e8, he's going to pick up this pawn, and then the material's even, but he's saying, my king is completely safe, I've got all these dark squares to play with, bishop's probably better than the knight, and Black's still the one attacking. So I just thought that whole sequence was extremely impressive.
Yeah, this seemed like Magnus had control at this point. A couple moves ago, there might have been a bailout we were looking at for Fabiano with rook f4.
I think we basically thought that it's one of those bailouts that's difficult to play because you have to admit right now that the position is bad, and that you have to play a move like this. And that can be tough to do when technically you're not even down material yet. You just have to admit that, well, my opponent's initiative and intuition is correct. It's very strong, and you just have to do it. But I think when we looked at this, we had a feeling that a position like this, queen d4, I think was one of our ideas, and rook f8.
Yeah. Just the exposed king here, and, well, the material deficit.
Got moves like queen e5, queen d6 is obviously on tap right now to pick up the rook, queen a1 to start attacking all these pawns, and it just seemed like a position like this would be maybe just losing on the spot and very risky to go for it if you're Fabiano, when to him, rook g2, he's still defending, he's still in there with a shout, so a risky type of move to go for, and that's probably why he didn't do it. But yes, that was definitely potentially the bailout option that he needed. But yeah, the way it played out in the game, I think it was pretty instructive up until a certain point. I think Magnus played almost perfectly.
It's this h pawn. If Black doesn't have this h pawn,
right,
then White has a nice blockade. With this knight on the light squares, this bishop on c7, dark square bishop can't contest it at all, but Magnus just calmly takes his pawn and just says, open position.
Yeah.
White's king isn't safe with the queens on the board. G-file. Can't hold it.
Yeah.
But this is also where things got a little strange. I thought that I would have played a little bit differently as Black. He played h5 here.
Yeah. It's reasonable. He does want to control g4. I think we were looking at a few more direct options, like just queen e5 right away, and just play queen b2. Nice and simple. It's just you can't defend all the pawns. The dark squares are so weak. Your rook still controls the g-file. We weren't sure that h5 was necessary, but we really couldn't criticize because he was still getting winning position. Seemed like he was still confident here. Queen g1, knight f1, and I actually ended up liking Magnus's technique here because he sort of put his opponent's pieces in a situation where none of them could move. And after h4, king d2, king b7, c3, this was probably the moment where we just figured Magnus missed some outright wins.
Caruana was under a minute.
Under a minute, yeah.
Because he had to make move 40, and this is precisely the moment where we thought Magnus was just going to deliver the final blow.
Yeah, people are
Rook
suggesting
G3.
maybe Queen G2 check at some point.
If
but
you go, well, I think that one.
I thought that the way that he played it was great. Queen G2 might be possible, but I certainly thought that the way he played it was almost ideal. You put the guy in a box. The king is still. You want to keep the queens on the board, generally speaking, when you're dealing with position like this where white's king's on e2, and I think even here potentially even the move before, it's like this rook g3 idea was the main one that we were considering, and taking with the h pawn. I think we just thought that was winning in almost every situation.
I haven't checked, but to me it looks good. Rook g3, can we show that?
Was it
well, it worked in every line we looked at.
Yeah, that's true.
But we can show it here.
This was one of the ones. And that the rook, has trouble. Rook there is always queen h1. Queen b1 is just picking up this pawn in every single line. Rook e2, for example. Queen b1.
Yep.
And it's just very hard to play. We thought you're just picking up so many pawns with check, and you've got these two connected pass pawns. I think the exact same idea was available here. Even with the king on c8, this was probably the first time where it looked the most visual, just because you don't even have c3 played. So after this move, just getting that bishop to e5 and threatening queen a1, bishop c3 would be a funny little checkmate there. And if you get checked like this, we thought after bishop c7, there's no more checks. The checks run out, and
and now queen f1.
Queen f1, as long as you stop the blockade there, you should be fine. And I think after rook e1, g2 is a nice touch. And we can even show one of the mates that we looked at. Queen here, queen, check, and checkmate. So we thought that, just rook g3 was winning, maybe the first time, maybe the second time as well. Maybe even a third time, as rook g3 was always available, and it seemed like it was the entire point of playing the move h4 by black right here. So when black played h4, we thought, okay, this is a telltale, rook g3 is coming, and it's just lights out. But what happened? We thought maybe the most likely thing was he thought his move was just as good, and then he was just wrong about that. That's probably the only way to put it.
I can't explain queen g7.
Queen g7 and this.
And this resulting sequence.
Once you get the queen trade, there's so many drawing chances. Maybe it was just drawn here, but obviously we're getting close to move 40, and as they hit the time control right here, Fabi probably took a break saying, okay, I probably have good chances to draw. And honestly, that's what he did. From here, we saw this sequence being incredibly forced.
Well, allowing the queens to be traded off, allowing the knight to go
to
from f1,
reactivate,
activate. All of this was unnecessary. That rook g3 move was winning multiple times, and it wasn't that hard to calculate.
No, it wasn't. And obviously he was looking for it. It's not a move that you miss. I think that he saw it, but he thought, okay, it's sacking a rook. There's no need to do that when I have this other move that's also winning. But it happened that he just miscalculated and was wrong about that. And this, I think we slowly identified that b4 was the right way to do it. And I think the bottom line is that this rook ending game here is just drawn. This is just probably drawn. It certainly seemed that way the way they played it. Probably, though, I can't speak to the fact that this is a dead draw. Definitely didn't. I don't know. Don't know the official theory or anything, but it seemed like this would probably be a draw. But we thought that Magnus might play a5 or at least try.
He went for a couple hours here. I mean, we can say that if you can trade the c pawn for the b pawn, that you get two connected pass pawns, and that's going to be you have great winning chances there, if not winning. But on the other hand, white shouldn't allow that, and then you're looking to trade you need to create a pass pawn. So if you can't trade the c for the b pawn, you have to trade the a for the b pawn. And then you have the pawns on c6 and b5 versus white's pawn on d3. And that seemed tricky, and Magnus was trying there, but he didn't commit to that end game.
No, he didn't. I mean, he tried very hard, but it didn't look like he tried the most testing idea, which was trying to trade some pawns with a5 rather than what happened in the game. But basically from here, that's just the end of the story here. Magnus played this position for a while. Credit to Fabiano, he did defend it for a long period of time, which is not easy to do. But Magnus was just probably frustrated, right? Understandably. He was dead winning, I think, for a number of different reasons. And in the end, he drew the first game of the World Championship against Fabiano, who probably almost feels like a victory for Team Fabiano, because with the white pieces in the first game of the match, he was completely lost. And they're definitely going to revisit that opening, revisit the entire white repertoire in general, and just, have to have a team meeting after a game like that.
Yeah, it's definitely one of the most winning positions that I've seen Magnus mess up in a World Championship match, especially based on the time situation, momentum, and all the moves that he was playing seemed clear to everyone that he was on the right path, and then just a hiccup the final few meters, and Caruana took that and played the right moves to crawl back into the game.
Yep. So there you go. That's our quick analysis of the round 1 game between Magnus Carlsen and Fabiano Caruana at the World Chess Championships, and that was a pretty exciting game, and it turned into just a long struggle at the end. But I'd say that was pretty quick. For how long the game was, I think that was fairly quick. You gotta think about things in perspective, relatively. But it does feel like a victory for Caruana. So I just don't know how people are gonna feel. It's like, is Fabi gonna be happy? Is Magnus gonna be pissed? I don't know.
Push him, baby.